Innovation and Technology grant. And my study was broken into 3 parts. The first was a literature review. We basically just wanted to see what was out there. There was a lot of questions being asked about what to do. We wanted to find out exactly what had been done and where the gaps in the literature were. The second part of my project was taking advantage of the post-frost management treatments that were set up here in the Yarra Valley directly after October 2006 frost, and they were done at St Hubert's and also at Coombe Farm, and most of the results I'll present to you today are from Coombe Farm. The third part of my project was basically setting up some experiments ourselves to test a few theories, have a go at some grapevine manipulation trials, and maybe to try and fill in some of the gaps that the literature had. So just as an overview, like Greg said earlier, the climate change may lead to more frost in the future, and this is due to the shift in phenology, so earlier bud burst, but also the drier springs. So in October 2006 we had the frost that hit most of southern Victoria, so not just Victoria, South Australia and as high up as New South Wales. Several areas recorded frost as cold as -4 for up to 3 hours, and up to 100% crop loss was recorded in some areas. Now, initially it was 100% crop loss, but I think if a lot of those growers went back and looked at their vines in February and had a look at what the secondary shoots were doing, they'd find that they actually had some crop recovery. And one of my big messages for today is don't panic. If you get heavily frosted, don't panic. The only time the panic should happen is if you get a second frost, and then you can panic all you like. Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit first about the current literature, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how frost occurs and why you get damage. So the first thing we found was frost damage occurs with extracellular ice formation. Now, to explain that, in a grapevine leaf or in a grapevine shoot, you have your plant cells, and inside those plant cells is water. And particularly in young shoots, as Mike was saying, you get more water in a young shoot, and as they're growing you get water movement through the shoots. When it gets cold, the plant's natural defence mechanism is to shift that water from inside the cell into the extracellular plant spaces. If you have a look at this cell, this is a Californian poppy leaf cross section, and if you have a look just down here, this little black area along here, these little spots just in here and through here are the extracellular spaces. So where this white arrow is pointing, in here, that is an extracellular space. And when the temperature becomes cold, the water moves into this space, and this is what happens. This is the water from, this is the same cross section. These cells here, these big fat cells here, all the water's moved out into these spaces here, and these are these spaces. And what's happened is this is ice crystals that have formed once it's got cool. So, frost damage occurs with extracellular ice formation. The injury is not from the ruptured cells, but actually from the cells being crushed. And what they've found in some of the literature, and it's only very early days with this research, but that the rate of warming after a frost may affect the influence of the recovery of your grapevine or of your plant. And the reason for this being is that when those ice crystals defrost, like thaw, hopefully what's happening is if it does it very slowly, there is a chance that water can then actually go back into the cells if the crush injury has not been too severe. And also the temperature of freezing is influenced by the status of the vine, so the age of your shoots, whether there's any ice nucleators present, and little things like when the water moves into those extracellular spaces, it's supercooled. And with supercooled water, things like agitation may actually cause it to turn into ice, and Tom will actually show you a visual representation of that in his talk. A few interesting facts. The forecast temperatures are taken at 1.3 metres above ground level, about there, which is basically your fruiting canopy height. In irradiation frost, the air cools from the ground up, and the leaf, shoot and cane or your tissue temperatures are colder than your air temperature, and up to 3 degrees colder it's been found. Now the reason these things are quite interesting and that you need to keep them in your mind when you're working on your forecast temperatures and thinking about turning on your windmills is that depends on the height of your canopy, depends on where your shoots are on your cordons. Lower shoots are more likely to get frosted than higher shoots. And just going on forecast temperatures, so if the forecast temperature's +1, your actual shoot or your tissue temperatures are going to be -1. If your forecast temperature is 0, your tissue temperature can be up to -2. So you need to keep that in mind when you're going on forecast temperatures. Also, orientation of your shoots. So horizontal leaves are colder than vertical leaves. The larger the surface area exposed, the cooler they're going to be. So larger leaves are going to be cooler than smaller leaves, and that's due to the surface area exposed. And just the same as the ground radiates heat, your tissues radiate heat as well. So critical temperatures, Mike's touched on critical temperatures a little bit, and they're a really important factor when you're making decisions about frost preventative measures. And what we found in the literature was there's been a few studies done, or quite a few studies done, but the results are very varied. And this graph that I'm about to put up shows how varied it is. These are several different studies that have been done. And if you have a look, T0 is no damage, no percent of damage on the vines. This is 10% of damage. So it's not 10% of your leaf has damaged, it's 10% of your leaves are damaged. 50% damage, 90% damage. And if you just note, and Mike's actually covered this, the further down you are in your phenology, the higher the temperature that you sustain damage. Yep. Now these are the reason that if you have a look, the results really, really varied. So like you're 10.6 at 10% and at 50%, and this was also Concord is -4.9. Within the studies, and this is one of the things I wanted to point out, is that the studies are really varied. Some studies do air temperature, some do tissue temperature, some are done in the field, some are done in controlled temperature chambers. So when you're going on critical temperatures, you have to take it all a little bit with a grain of salt, or you need to really look at how they've measured before you start relating it back. The other thing you'll note is Pinot Noir and Concord, there's probably only 2 papers that I picked up that weren't Concord, and they were both Pinot, and there's maybe 1 or 2 papers that were mentioned grapes. They didn't say what variety.